One of the first steps towards crypto agility is gathering an inventory of the cryptography used in your organization. Find out how to accomplish this and monitor future changes on a dashboard in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the Vice President of Cryptographic Research and Development at InfoSec Global, or ISG, Vladimir Soukharev. Welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you.
Yeah, been working with your company for a little while, but maybe you want to tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you found your way to quantum?
So I'm a cryptographer by training. I got my education from University of Waterloo, did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD there. My PhD was actually in the area of post-quantum cryptography. I was heavily focusing in all the areas of cryptography, but my thesis was specifically around post-quantum cryptography. And ever since then, I've been working in industry after getting my PhD and focusing a lot on post-quantum crypto, as well as working on standards, working on NCCOE, NIST initiatives, Quantum Safe Canada, and a number of other initiatives happening around the world. So I've been in the generic cryptographic space, as well as was a big focus on the entire post-quantum field.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about post-quantum cryptography a lot, and I could safely say this is the first time we had someone whose actual degree was in that specifically. Most people seem to find their way to it, but you started the way. That's pretty great. So I think we have the right guest on for this topic. So let's talk a little bit about ISG and how you brought that expertise there and what the company does.
So what the company does, we solve a lot of cryptographic problems. Among those ones is the post-quantum problem. And it's actually, I would say, today it's the fuel to solve a lot of other cryptographic problems, which I say are long time overdue. So we look at cryptography as the whole lifecycle management, because the way cryptography has been managed for the past 30, 40 years, it's no longer, I would say, applicable to the upcoming quantum safe era that we're entering at the current moment. And so we're trying to revolutionize, to look at it differently, and be able to change cryptography on the fly and also be able to manage it. And managing includes two major aspects. It's being able to detect cryptography, have the inventory of your cryptography. That's what our AgileSec analytics tool does. And the second part is our AgileSec agility tool. That's the tool that lets you pretty much switch cryptography right on the fly. Because what happens with today's upcoming standards for post-quantum is that we know there are some schemes that were already standardized, some are in the process of being standardized, some are in parallel tracks of being standardized. So it's a really much more complicated environment that we're yet to see and experience in the future. And that's why a lot of things that we've done in cryptography before were very static and they're no longer applicable, or they're going to be very difficult to apply to the upcoming era. And so therefore we're trying to solve this much larger problem, which again has received a lot of attention because of the how complicated the post-quantum transition is going to be.
Yeah, and post-quantum transition is going to be on everyone's mind starting this year, basically, right? With NIST coming out with the new standards. But like you're saying, you guys do a lot more than just inventory. That's only like a little piece of it, right? So there is an actual tool, correct? And can you give us so it's called AgileSec, and it has like different like tiers and different functions. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's basically two major tools which kind of work together, but they can be seen independently. The first tool is the one you mentioned, is the one that does inventory. And today, a lot of cryptography is mismanaged. It's all over the place, generations of developers going through the ecosystem. And so you really need to have the view of cryptography. And applying it to post-quantum, you can actually look at things that are classically vulnerable and that are quantumly vulnerable, and the tool even actually lets you look at algorithms being discovered, how vulnerable they are in terms of quantum threat, look at how many logical qubits are needed to break certain algorithms. Was the best known algorithms, of course, today from the theoretical, I guess, point of view. We don't have a large enough quantum computer yet, but there's a lot of cryptanalysis done in that regards. So the tool is able to, again, discover your cryptographic inventory, going down to binaries, going to source code, going to various aspects of it, and being able to give you the inventory, what you have. And then from that point, you can actually see what is secure today, what is going to be quantum vulnerable, what is compliant, what is not compliant. So that's the number one step. It's actually the visibility, let's call it this way. The second tool is actually being able to manage cryptography. So what happens when you need to change cryptography? What happens if you need to manage multiple cryptographic standards? For instance, we know that even in a post-quantum world, what NIST has standardized so far and what, for example, the German BSI has standardized, these are very different algorithms. They've actually selected different algorithms for their standards. And let's say if you're a company that is operating over multiple countries, how do you stay compliant with multiple countries at the same time? So there's a component of being able to transition from one cryptography to another. There's a point of being able to support multiple global standards around the world. And also, when you find vulnerabilities, how do you change cryptography quickly? So there's a lot of things where cryptography needs to be much more agile. And this is where our AgileSec agility comes into play. So we're basically able to decouple crypto from the applications, and then your applications would become independent of cryptography. They're starting to talk basically in a crypto-agnostic way. And on the other side, you can dynamically plug in various cryptographic providers, which can be coming from us or can be coming from you or any other third party. So you're not obliged to use the providers that are coming from us. And you can plug, maybe the provider doesn't exist today yet. So that's the cryptographic agility tool, which basically dynamically lets you manage and change your cryptography on the fly.
Okay, so to install this, I'm assuming there is, and every once in a while I know the answer to a question, but for the listeners, they might be assuming that there's a server, right, like running something, and then some kind of agents that are reporting locally, and then some kind of like scanning of packets in motion. So maybe if you can like help us visualize what that looks like a little bit.
Okay, so for the first tool, for the analytics part, yes, so you would install it centrally and then you would deploy so-called sensors. I mean, they're not as invasive as agents. They only need the read-only access. And we also have multiple integrations. Let's say if the customer doesn't want to use our sensor, they can leverage CrowdStrike Tanium sensors to actually collect the data for our tool. And then, pretty much the reverse engineering is happening then centrally of the findings that are being collected. So that's for this tool. The agility tool is actually able to, this is a little bit more on a developer side. So think that of it in terms of, let's say you have a crypto-agnostic library and you are making specific cryptographic calls today, but now you want to start making crypto-agnostic calls. So you need to do this one type crypto library replacement, but except you're replacing for something generic, which has a dynamic way of plugging other cryptographic libraries that you want to use and unplug them without changing your application. So on one side, if you're doing a pure agility migration, then you would have to do this one-time change. But there's other ways also, using cryptography as a service idea, but again, internally to your organization. Or there's other approaches as well, using it as a proxy, but then you get like double encryption. So there's various options, depends on the customer needs that we offer.
Okay, so this will run full time, and some of the benefits are like you said, you might need different standards for different customers, different countries. This lets you keep track of that all along. And earlier, you also mentioned things that might not have anything to do with quantum, right? You might find out that you're running SSL1 or something somewhere, or something awful like that, and like, whoa, we didn't even know that was present. So do you get then some kind of ability to track progress towards a goal of agility? Like, is there some kind of like reporting that can be pulled whenever needed?
Yeah, so basically, this is sort of the combination of the two tools working together. One would actually detect and saying, all of a sudden find you're using MD5, which should not be used for many years now, mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, actually, and it's a true story. Unfortunately, we can actually see that MD5. I mean, I'm not even talking about SHA-1. SHA-1s are all over the place still, but even MD5s, there we find quite plenty of those ones. And so one thing is to be able to find it and detect it while it's there, and then the second thing, if you're agile, then you would be able to replace it quickly. If you're not crypto agile at that point, then of course you have to go through, the task of doing the actual cryptographic replacement. And I mean, we know that in a sort of traditional approach to cryptography, how much effort it took organizations to migrate from SHA-1 to SHA-2, just one simple algorithm. I mean, simple, I'm talking again in mathematical cryptographic terms. I mean, from engineering point of view, that was quite an enormous task to do.
So how does this work with like the developer code? So in a company, if you're writing your own programs, and then does it go like into a internal GitHub or something, and like look at what was used to write each program?
So for the analytics tool, it pretty much goes anywhere you point it in terms inside your environment. Yes, it can be GitHub, it can be really anything. And the thing is that it does the scan, as I mentioned, not just the source code, but also the binaries. So let's say you have third-party applications in your environment. We would be able to discover cryptography inside those. So you might not have source code and it's difficult to even see what's inside of it, but we're still able to detect what kind of cryptographic, as we call them, artifacts. And we, just to actually mention what we mean by cryptography, sometimes people think that it's only certificates. It's actually certificates, keys, key stores, algorithms, libraries. So all the aspects of cryptography, you could think of it and look at it from multiple angles.
Yeah, you could do like an export from like key management, right? To get the information.
Yes.
Yeah. So so this isn't really a noisy tool. If someone hears something like this, it's running. They might like start to panic for a moment, but in reality, if you run Nessus, you're doing something 1,000 times more noisy than this tool would be on any given moment, right?
Yes, and it's actually, and also in terms of the overhead is actually quite minimal, as well as there's other options. If let's say you're really worried about these things, you might, run it turn from say after 5 p.m. and until 9 a.m. or something like this. You can set up things like that. So it's very flexible in terms of how and when you run it. Plus, the tool doesn't need to run 24/7. The thing is, you would do maybe weekly scans or maybe monthly scans, depending on which environment you're scanning or what the company policies are, etc.
Yeah, and the third party point you brought up is important. Like when you're doing an agility assessment in general at how a company's posture is in this space, oftentimes they don't really know what their third party's plans are for post-quantum cryptography in the future. So it's good to point out what's being used now that they might not even be aware of. And then, of course, you have to do the legwork of talking to all these vendors and saying, well, what are you going to do tomorrow? Like what are you planning on doing in the future?
Exactly. And even if you've already, submitted your requirements to third-party vendors saying, I want you to support, such and such algorithms that should be, quantum resistant, etc., you can actually use the tool to scan them after you get the updated version to make sure it actually has what you requested for, because otherwise you don't really have a way to, really see it properly, that they've implemented what you actually wanted them to have in there. Maybe they implemented, the wrong country algorithm. Let's say, you're a US company and they've included by mistake German standards inside of those ones. And you would say, well, hold on a second, this brings me out of compliance. Maybe it's secure from, quantum resistance point of view, but there's also a compliance aspect to it too.
Yeah, that's a basic trust but verify. And in my case, I like to think of it as don't trust, so verify. It's like, that's more about how that sounds to me. So how does this sort of interact or coexist with other security software? Like you already hinted that we can get data from other like endpoints, right? So can you talk a little bit more about integration? Because some people do have like dashboard fatigue and things like that.
Yeah, so the tool itself is very integratable. One thing is that the tool looks at the core of core of security, which is cryptography. Mm-hmm. And so we don't actually do other security checks because there's a lot of other vendors out there. We're not really there to compete, but everybody looks at cryptography as a black box. Mm-hmm. And our tool pretty much says, okay, you know what? Don't be scared of that black box. We're going to help you look what's inside of it. And it's quite essential because if cryptography is broken, all of the security, how many layers of security you're putting on top of it, they're actually going to be not that effective in terms of protecting your data. And again, as I mentioned, there's a number of integrations. They're happening on both sides. On the collection side, so again, the tool is completely self-contained. You can collect the data. You was using native sensors. You can report the data using native dashboard. But let's say you have, as I already mentioned, Tanium, CrowdStrike, other sensors already in your environment. You can leverage them to collect the data. It's not the same data they collect for themselves. So they actually collect more data for our tool. So then that's why we need a little bit like an extra step of integration. It's not just, let's take that data that they're reporting and analyze it. They don't collect enough data for our tool. So we do an integration to leverage those sensors to collect enough data for our tool to be able to analyze and bring you something valuable. And there is integrations on the other side. So as one example I can bring up is that you can have your own custom dashboard, first of all, but you could also have other tools take that information and create something actionable for the organization. For instance, we have integration that once the tool does a report, there's a ServiceNow ticket that can be created for your dev team or security operations team, whoever is responsible for that area. And then that ticket appears, and then you can actually start taking care of it. So you don't even need to look at our tool. It runs there implicitly, and then all of a sudden you get your service ticket now. It's that ServiceNow tickets, and you're able to start taking actions in the same sort of flow as the organization is used to. And also we have a number of other integrations available. And again, as I mentioned, the API is very degradable. So if the integration is not listed, it's most likely we can actually quite easily add it.
Yeah, so I was first interested in this tool just as like a in a model that you didn't really design it for. I just wanted it as a quick and dirty go in with it, install it, run it in a customer site while we're doing like a whole post-quantum audit and assessment kind of deal, and then be able to show the technical inventory. But the more I started looking into it, there's a lot of benefits, it looks like, to just having it live there and having it monitor and track what's going on and evolve as part of your infrastructure. So that's kind of like how we want to use it. And of course now we can't really talk about details, but we're going to be working on a project with a customer together where we're doing something like that. Kind of like there's the tool, and then there's all that other stuff that my company brings. So it blends in. But I did want to ask you, so more recently, IBM was taking an approach on doing like these kinds of audits with a tool and everything. And they came up with their cryptographic bill of materials and that whole approach. So I didn't know if you ever got a chance to like either directly benchmark this against that, or just more anecdotally, like if you could comment on how it might differ.
So one thing to say about the IBM is, I'm very thankful to them for creating that term, CBOM, because, before we did not have that. So it's great that they've coined that term, and this works really great because, we're all about cryptography, and having CBOM is great at this point. And they do have tools that actually do the scanning, but I would say their tool is very niche oriented in a sense. From what I can see is that it does a certain level of discovery, but our tool, we're meant, because we're sort of coming again from a purely sort of cryptographic point of view, we go deeper in terms of what cryptographic artifacts we're able to discover and how much we can report on them and recommendations, and even just, our database of matching all these cryptographic standards coming from all over the world and the latest cryptanalysis that are related to those ones. So we're trying to really focus much deeper on the cryptographic expertise within that tool and how much the tool is able to discover. So basically, I would say it's, to a certain extent, you can think of it as an enhancement for any CBOM tool that is available out there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I noticed, I was happy to see it too, because when they were bringing it up at their last big gathering, when they also announced their newest processors, it was just fun to see the audience be exposed to this concept. And you could just tell it was new to so many people there. And it's like shocking to me that it was new to anyone in this industry, but it just was, this idea of the need to understand what these ciphers are and where they live. So what are your thoughts in general, like if we step away from the tool, on where PQC is headed this year and beyond? Obviously, you could talk a little bit about the importance of this year with NIST and everything, and then kind of where we go from there.
So, well, I'll start a year before, actually. So I think 2023 was a very stage-setting year for the whole PQC migration. I mean, we've seen NIST finally provide FIPS standards, like the FIPS 203, 204, 205, which are going to get finalized within a few weeks, according to their timelines. But again, finally, because, in 2022, we kind of saw, well, here's the standard, but we don't have the standard written yet, but these are the schemes that are being standardized. So we finally got the official documents. So a lot of organizations, they no longer can say, oh, we're just waiting for NIST. Well, NIST already provided the documentation. Another thing is the NCCOE PQC migration project that has been going on for a few years. And there was actually quite substantial reports released in December. And one of them is on specifically on cryptographic discovery. The other one's on cryptographic interoperability of classical and post-quantum schemes. So a lot of things were set stage, and then there's a number of government memos like the OMB 2302, I believe, memo that came out last year. But now I can see that the stage is very well set. The tools have been, discussed. A number of tools have been published that can be used, and everybody realizes that although, as we call it now, CRQC cryptographic reliable quantum computer might not be available today, but everybody realizes this is a multi-year transition. And since we finally set the stage and we have the standards, maybe it's partial standards, we don't have the full set of standards, but we might never have the full set. It might always be changing. The migration step number 1 by NCCOE recommendations has been set. So I think this year we have all the tools, and we can see that there's a lot of interest right now in starting the whole migration and making sure that we're starting on time so that we are done on time, when CRQC appears. Because if CRQC appears, say, 2 years from now, I think 90% of organizations are going to be already too late, even if they start today. So hopefully we'll have enough time until CRQC is here. And so it's time to finally start taking first steps, because a lot of organizations have been only kind of trying to understand the problem. And I can see the evolution over the years, right? So 5 years ago, everybody was like, oh, yes, I know there's going to be, this quantum problem, which I'll probably look at later. And finally, over 2023, we're there that everybody realizes it's going to be a problem, but we have no idea what to do. So that year has set the stage quite well. So 2024, I can see that, pretty much any in the industrial research conferences you look at, post quantum is actually one of the topics, one way or another, that is being included. I don't think there's a single conference now that doesn't include that topic. And now we can see a lot of government, again, initiatives that are talking about it and telling that there should be actions taken. Even if you look at CNSA 2.0 standard, it has specific dates. And I believe the earliest date is something around 2030, which is only like 6 years away. And this means that we should have started probably a year ago to meet that deadline. So therefore, 2024 is vital to start to make sure that we're not too late for this for the upcoming threat. Now, another thing to look at is harvest now defibrillator attacks, because we understand that the information we send today is already quantum vulnerable if somebody is recording it. So if that information needs to stay, safe for more than 5 years, well, we technically lost it already, because somebody might have recorded it and they're just waiting to get their hands on a large enough quantum computer.
Yeah. Harvest now defibrillator. That's one of the biggest issues that ties in with Moscow's theorem. How long is the shelf life of a secret? And some industries, that's a really long time. Like I like to say, like in healthcare, the lifetime of a secret is a lifetime. So
yes.
It's already too late for that information. So the best we could do is just start the migration. So you've written a lot of papers on like post-quantum cryptography, obviously, based on what your degree is on. New types of ECC, digital signatures. Are you doing any pure research now, that whether it's like related to future versions of ISG's software or not?
Yes, we are doing research. It's more oriented to something that we can actually apply quite fast in terms of the need for the industry today. So there's a few research projects, and it always comes to, let's figure out what's useful and what we can research. But we are keeping that part, because to stay innovative, you always need to research and stay, a bit ahead of even sometimes what is needed. You're trying to foresee what will be needed, and let's research that. And then by the time it's mature enough, we can actually include that to be part of the product. So there's, I would say, smaller research steps that are constantly ongoing. And then there's larger ones that we're looking at to making sure that we are able to prepare ourselves for the future. I mean, a number of things we were talking about, 6-7 years ago, everybody thought it was crazy. You guys are talking about these things now. You can actually see this terminology, even like cryptography and agility. Everybody thought it was crazy back in 2016. Now, every time you talk about cryptography and modernization around cryptography, the word agility comes into play 95% of the time. So we're looking at it from engineering perspective, from mathematical perspectives, and from what is going to be, I would say, the user-friendly perspective as well. That's important, because sometimes if your tool is great but nobody can understand it or can use it, that's a problem as well, because you want the tool to be usable, and that's another sort of area of research.
So right now, in the U.S. at least, the big feeling is that the federal agencies are going to be forced to do this first, and then everyone else is going to follow. Regulators are going to imitate and copy paste and just do the same kind of idea. How do you find it working with government agencies right now? Like, how does that different from like the private sector?
So what I can see is that, well, first of all, I really like what happened over the course of last year. Government agencies started talking way more about it. They're actually starting to search for solutions. They have very interesting enthusiasts who are understanding the problem. They're trying to look for it. Of course, the government side is, I would say, all these processes are slower than on a, private sector, because private sector seems to be able to move faster because there's less regulations that they need to follow. They got a little bit more, I would say, more available path that they can take in terms of trying to adapt, new technology. But again, the way the government has changed over the course of last year makes me very happy, because there seems to be a lot of progress and a lot more interest. And they're truly, before it was like, let's listen into what's available out there. Now it feels more like, what is available out there? Can you help us? Tell us how can we solve these problems?
Yeah, I was impressed that part of the roadmap for like the White House memorandum is to pull in what they call like the 12 key companies. I guess the cloud providers, a few major financials, and try and influence the industry. The other thing I'm seeing though is a lot of companies are waiting for some kind of consortium to have a vote in this. Like some financials, like midsize or so, they're like, we'll get around to it when some governing body or some group decides that this is the best way to go. And they're kind of like waiting to follow along. So I every once in a while I give thought to how can I influence some consortium to like speed up the process here, so people aren't left like kind of in the lurch. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, on how we can like get the consortiums to kind of like light a fire.
So there are multiple consortiums that are being formed. For example, you can see, financial sector doing the FSISAC. Basically, they're trying to develop, quantum risk assessment model in there. You can see, for example, Quantum Industry Canada trying to bring organizations together but they're kind of trying to look at it from multiple angles, from quantum computing as well as post-quantum cryptography, as well as quantum cryptography. There's multiple meanings for quantum, which are almost independent. They're trying to bring it together. We can see consortiums being formed, and you're right that a number of organizations are waiting for something consortium to tell them, while other ones I can actually see taking very proactive approach. They are part of that consortium, but they're still, if they have the bandwidth to move forward without waiting for the consortium, I'm actually quite happy to see, a number of organizations that are still moving forward, although participating in the consortium at the same time, but understanding the consortium is falling back a bit, because it takes longer for, when there's multiple players involved, it takes longer to come to a consensus versus when you're trying to work on your own and you have the bandwidth in terms of, your engineers, your finances, etc., and to basically start solving the problem. But what's interesting, those players that are ahead, I can see them coming back to the consortium and bringing it back to them and saying, you know what, we've done this. This works. Let's include that as part of the consortium. And it feels like those players are becoming the stronger players among the consortium, which have more influence. So that's a sort of good turnaround of those ones that are trying to move forward.
I love to see that too. Yeah, I love like when a customer wants us to do a white paper with them or something after, just to help, influence everyone else. And I hope to see a lot more of that this year. That's why I wanted to make sure to have you come on and talk about this tool and how important it is to helping on this process this year. And we have a lot of important work to get to, don't we? This year, we really do.
Oh yes, a lot of work. And I always say that the upcoming cryptographic change that is going to be happening in the world, it's huge, but we don't even understand how huge it is. It's going to be the biggest one in history. That's one thing we understand, and we understand it's going to be big. But I think we're yet to experience how big it will be.
Yeah, I agree. So that's a good point to leave on. It's going to be seismic, and I guess we should be excited that we're so actively involved in it. this year. So to everyone listening, if you wanted to take a look at the tool for an actual enterprise installation, I do believe there's like a 30-day free trial or something that could be set up if you want to see how that works. So you can check out the show notes where I've links to all that. And Vladimir, thanks again for coming on, and I'll be seeing your face in the projects we're going to be working on. So I'll see you soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. InfoSec Global provides software solutions to the post-quantum cryptography challenges facing all businesses this year and on. Their AgileSec platform can audit ciphers on servers, in code repos, both source code and binaries, and in packets in motion on your network. It accomplishes this with scanning and using read-only sensors or agents on hosts. Other supported sensors already on your network can be used too, such as CrowdStrike. In addition to building this inventory, the software provides a dashboard where you can see your environment and identify both post-quantum risks and more near-term ones. You can then track remediation steps, including what standards you're trying to meet. For example, you might have geographic profiles that differ for US and Europe locations. Or you may have to accommodate customers or third parties with different standards than yours. Using this tool in combination with a full audit of your cryptographic infrastructure, policies, and procedures will prepare you for the years of remediation ahead as we all seek to become post-quantum ready. There's a 30-day free trial in the link in the show notes if you want to check out AgileSec. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Vladimir Soukharev for joining to discuss InfoSec Global. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protiviti's The Post-Quantum World and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker, that's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protiviti. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. I'll be gathering those and hopefully doing an AMA episode soon. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protiviti.com or follow Protiviti Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.